There is a moment in every seeker's journey when the path, once illuminated by the soft glow of inspiration, darkens into something far more treacherous. The air grows thick with unseen resistance. The ground trembles beneath the weight of invisible forces, and what was once a steady ascent becomes a labyrinth of shadows. This is the paradox of awakening. The closer one draws to the light, the more fiercely the darkness seems to rally. Spiritual attacks, those inexplicable waves of turmoil, doubt, and adversity, are not merely obstacles to be overcome, but cryptic messages carved into the very fabric of transformation. They are the universe's way of testing the mettle of the soul, of ensuring that the awakening is not a fleeting spark, but an unquenchable fire. To understand why the path of awakening is so often strewn with trials, one must first recognize that growth is not a gentle unfurling, but a seismic upheaval. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly by simply growing wings. It must first dissolve into chaos within the chrysalis, its old form breaking down entirely before the new can emerge. So too does the human spirit undergo a kind of alchemical disintegration when it steps onto the path of true awakening. What we perceive as attacks, be they external misfortunes, internal turmoil, or the sudden unraveling of long-held certainties, are often the necessary friction required to sand away the illusions that keep us small. The ego, that stubborn architect of identity, does not surrender its throne willingly. It wages wars in the hidden chambers of the psyche, conjuring storms of fear, doubt, and even despair to deter the seeker from venturing further into the unknown. Yet these battles are not without purpose. They are initiations, rites of passage disguised as afflictions. Imagine a ship setting sail toward a distant horizon, only to be met with towering waves and howling winds. The tempest is not there to destroy the vessel, but to prove its seaworthiness, to ensure it can navigate the vast and unpredictable ocean of expanded consciousness. In the same way, spiritual attacks serve as a kind of cosmic litmus test, separating the curious from the committed, the dabblers from the devoted. They ask, in their own silent language, how deeply do you wish to know yourself? How far are you willing to go? But there is another layer to this mystery, one that stretches beyond the individual and into the collective tapestry of existence. The awakened soul is not an isolated phenomenon, but a ripple in the great ocean of consciousness, and every ripple disturbs the stillness of the waters. To awaken is to disrupt the inertia of the unseen realms, to challenge the stagnant energies that thrive on unconsciousness. It is no wonder then that the moment one begins to rise, the gravitational pull of the old world tightens its grip. The shadows that cling to the edges of awareness do not want to be seen, let alone dissolved. They will whisper lies of unworthiness, conjure specters of failure, and even wear the masks of those we love to sow seeds of doubt. Yet each of these apparitions carries a key, if only we have the courage to reach into the darkness and claim it. This is the hidden meaning of spiritual attacks. They are not punishments, but invitations. They call us to remember our own sovereignty, to sharpen our discernment, and to cultivate a faith that is not dependent on external serenity, but rooted in an unshakable inner knowing. The trials are the whetstone against which the blade of the spirit is honed, and without them, awakening would be a theoretical concept rather than a lived reality. The mystic does not transcend the world by escaping it, but by moving through its fires and emerging, time and again, reforged. So if you find yourself in the midst of such storms, take heart. You are not being abandoned, you are being prepared. The universe does not waste its energy on meaningless torment. Every challenge is a thread in the grand design, a stitch in the tapestry of your becoming. The question is not why these trials come, but what they are asking you to uncover within yourself. For the darkness, when faced with unwavering light, has no choice but to reveal its secrets, and in doing so, it becomes part of the light itself. To grasp the deeper architecture of spiritual attacks, one must first step beyond the illusion that they are random misfortunes or mere tests of endurance. They are instead echoes of an ancient dialogue between the soul and the cosmos, a dialogue that unfolds in the language of symbols, synchronicities, and the subtle tremors of the unseen. At their core, these challenges are not disruptions of peace, but its very prerequisites. the necessary contractions before the expansion, the silence before the revelation. One of the central themes woven into the fabric of spiritual attacks is the concept of sacred confrontation. The universe does not coddle the seeker. It confronts them with precisely what they need to see, often in the forms they least wish to encounter. A man who prides himself on his independence may suddenly find himself in situations where he must surrender control. A woman who has built her identity on being the eternal caretaker may be thrust into circumstances where she must finally receive rather than give. These are not cruel jokes of fate, but meticulously orchestrated mirrors, reflecting back the parts of the self that have been avoided, denied, or left unintegrated. The spiritual attack, then, is less an assault from the outside than a summons from within, an urgent missive from the depths of the soul, demanding attention. Another essential thread in this tapestry is the idea of energetic sovereignty. The moment one begins to awaken, the old constructs of identity, shaped by family, culture, and unconscious agreements, begin to crumble. This destabilization is often perceived as an attack because it disrupts the familiar, leaving the seeker feeling unmoored. Yet this disintegration is not a punishment, but a liberation. The ego, that master of disguise, will interpret the loss of its old structures as a threat, conjuring fear, anxiety, or even physical symptoms to pull the seeker back into the known. But the soul knows that true power lies beyond these illusions. The attacks in this light are the death throes of the false self, the final resistance before the emergence of something far more authentic. Then there is the principle of hidden alliances, the notion that what appears as an adversary is often an ally in disguise. Many traditions speak of the trickster archetype, the divine provocateur who teaches through chaos, forcing the seeker to question, adapt, and ultimately transcend their limitations. In this sense, the forces that seem to oppose us are not enemies but fierce mentors, ensuring that the awakening is not a superficial shift but a total transformation. The darkest nights of the soul are often the birthplace of its greatest illuminations, and the most relentless attacks can become the catalysts for unshakable wisdom. Underlying all of this is the paradox of divine timing. The soul's evolution does not follow the linear logic of the human mind. What feels like an unbearable delay or an unjust onslaught may, in truth, be the precise calibration required for the next stage of growth. A seed does not protest the darkness of the soil, it uses it. In the same way, the periods of greatest struggle are often the gestation periods for the most profound breakthroughs. The attacks, then, are not interruptions of the journey, but its very fabric, each one a stitch in the unseen tapestry of becoming. Yet perhaps the most transformative theme of all is the realization that the battleground is within. The external world, with its conflicts, betrayals, and hardships, is but a projection of the inner landscape. To wage war against perceived attackers, whether human or metaphysical, is to misunderstand the nature of the challenge. The true work is not to defeat an external foe, but to reclaim the fragmented parts of the self that give rise to the illusion of separation. Every spiritual attack, no matter how fierce, is ultimately an invitation to remember wholeness. These themes are not mere abstractions, but living truths, waiting to be discovered in the crucible of direct experience. They ask not for passive belief, but for active engagement, for the courage to face the storm and emerge not just intact, but alchemized. The attacks, in the end, are not the opposite of awakening, but its most faithful companions, the shadows that prove the presence of light. There is an ancient story told in many traditions of a golden treasure buried beneath a ruined temple, guarded by demons that scream and snarl at any who dare approach. The seeker, trembling yet determined, must hold fast to their purpose as the illusions of threat grow ever more vivid. Just as their hand finally grasps the treasure, the demons dissolve into wisps of smoke, revealing themselves to have been nothing more than sentinels of fear, placed there not to keep the seeker out, but to ensure only the worthy entered. This is the secret heart of spiritual attacks. They are the guardians at the gate, the shapeshifters who test the authenticity of our longing before allowing passage to the deeper mysteries. Consider the alchemical tradition, where the prima materia, the raw, base substance, must undergo negredo, the blackening, before any transformation can occur. In the depths of this putrefaction, where all seems lost and the material world rots into shadow, the alchemist learns a paradoxical truth. Decay is the womb of rebirth. So too with the soul's journey. The periods of greatest despair, when relationships fracture, health falters, or purpose evaporates, are not evidence of abandonment, but the first stirrings of a more radical communion with the divine. The attack in this light is the necessary dissolution of all that cannot accompany us into the next octave of being. Mythology offers another lens through which to understand these trials. The Babylonian goddess Inanna, descending into the underworld, is stripped of her jewels, her robes, and finally her very flesh at each of the 7 gates, until she hangs lifeless upon a hook. Yet this is not the end of her story. It is the precondition for her resurrection and ascent. Now carrying the wisdom of both light and darkness, her ordeal mirrors the soul's journey through spiritual attacks. What appears as annihilation is actually an initiation into a more expansive form of power. The hooks that suspend us in our darkest hours are not punishments, but sacred instruments of unraveling, making space for what must be born. Even nature whispers this truth in symbols. The oyster, irritated by a grain of sand, does not curse the intrusion, but wraps it in layers of nacre until a pearl is formed. The irritation becomes the nucleus of beauty. Our spiritual irritations, the betrayals, the crises of faith, the nights when the veil between worlds feels impossibly thick, are similarly potential pearls in the making. The attacks are the grains of sand that, if met with the inner alchemy of acceptance and transformation, can become the very jewels of our awakening. Perhaps the most poignant metaphor comes from the realm of metallurgy. The refiner's fire does not destroy gold, but liberates it from dross. The metal knows nothing of the refiner's purpose. As the flames lick away its impurities, it only knows the searing heat. Yet when the process is complete, what remains is untarnishable. Our trials function in the same way. They are not arbitrary sufferings, but the precise intensity required to burn away what keeps us from our purest essence. The attack, then, is love in its most fierce and unrecognizable form. These stories and symbols are not mere fancies, but living maps, left by those who walk this path before us. They remind us that the darkness is not what it seems, that the very forces which appear to obstruct our progress are in fact the sculptors of our sovereignty. When we learn to read the attacks as part of the soul's curriculum rather than as errors or punishments, we begin to cooperate with their hidden intelligence. The demon at the gate becomes our teacher. The stripping away of our illusions becomes our liberation. And the refiner's fire, though painful, becomes our sacred ally in the revelation of who we truly are. The mystical insights of spiritual transformation ring hollow if they cannot be felt in the grit of daily life, in the way we respond to a sudden job loss, a betrayal by a trusted friend, or the slow erosion of long-held dreams. The true measure of awakening is not how eloquently we speak of light in moments of peace, but how we navigate the storms when they arrive at our doorstep. Practical spirituality begins when we stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this here to show me?" When we recognize that every disruption carries an invitation to deeper embodiment of our wisdom. Consider the common experience of recurring obstacles, the financial struggles that persist despite diligent effort, the relationships that mirror old wounds, the creative projects that seem cursed with unforeseen complications. Viewed through the lens of spiritual attack, these patterns take on new meaning. They are not random misfortunes, but soul-level curriculum, designed to expose where we are still operating from fear rather than trust, from lack rather than abundance. The practical work begins with a simple but profound shift, seeing each challenge as a hologram containing the blueprint of our liberation. When a situation triggers disproportionate frustration or despair, that intensity is a flare marking the exact location of buried treasure, an unhealed aspect of self waiting to be reclaimed. The body itself often becomes the battleground where these spiritual tensions manifest. Unexplained fatigue, chronic pain, or sudden illnesses frequently arise during periods of intense awakening, not as punishments, but as the physical echo of the soul's labor. The practical response here is neither to spiritualize away medical realities nor to dismiss the metaphysical dimensions, but to approach the body as a sacred text. A persistent backache might be asking us to examine where we feel unsupported in life. Digestive issues could point to difficulties in processing emotional experiences. The body speaks in the language of symptoms when we've ignored the whispers of our intuition, and attending to these messages with both practical and spiritual care becomes an act of profound integration. Relationships serve as another potent arena for this work. When spiritual attacks appear as interpersonal conflicts, betrayals, misunderstandings, or sudden estrangements, the immediate pain often obscures their role as divine assignments. These experiences expose the unconscious contracts we've made, the ways we've traded authenticity for approval, or confused attachment with love. The practical path forward involves a courageous inventory. Where have I abandoned myself to keep this connection? What mirror is this person holding up that I've refused to look into? The most tumultuous relationships often become our greatest spiritual assignments, not because we must endure them indefinitely, but because they reveal exactly where our work lies. Financial turbulence provides yet another rich field for integration. The sudden loss of resources or persistent scarcity mindsets often arise during spiritual expansion, not because the universe is withholding, but because our relationship to abundance is being recalibrated at the root. Money flows where consciousness goes, and blocks in manifestation frequently point to unconscious beliefs about worthiness, safety, or the perceived conflict between spiritual and material realms. The practical work here involves examining our silent money mantras, those unspoken convictions like wealth corrupts or I must struggle to deserve, and consciously rewriting them through both inner work and outer action. Even the most mundane daily routines become sacred practice when viewed through this lens. The missed train, the malfunctioning computer, the series of small irritations. These are not mere coincidences, but the universe's way of training us in the art of presence. Each moment of frustration presents a choice, to react from old patterns or to respond from awakened awareness. The spiritual warrior recognizes that there are no neutral moments, that every interaction, no matter how small, is either reinforcing old constructs or birthing new consciousness. The ultimate practicality of spiritual awakening lies in this. It equips us to meet life not as victims of circumstance, but as conscious participants in a grand design. When we stop resisting the attacks and start collaborating with their intelligence, we discover that the universe has been rigged in our favor all along, not to spare us pain, but to use every experience as raw material for our evolution. The broken relationships become initiations into self-love. The financial struggles transform into masterclasses in trust. The physical ailments morph into sacred dialogues between body and spirit. Nothing is wasted, and every attack, when fully metabolized, becomes nourishment for the journey ahead. The journey through spiritual attacks is ultimately a homecoming, a return to the unshakable core of being that exists beyond the reach of any storm. What begins as a confrontation with darkness reveals itself to be an encounter with a deeper kind of light, one that does not flicker when the winds howl, but burns all the brighter for the tempest's breath. This is the great paradox of awakening. The trials we perceive as obstacles are in fact the very currents carrying us to shore. They arrive not to diminish our light, but to amplify it, not to break our spirit, but to prove its indestructibility. When we stand in the aftermath of these battles, we begin to recognize their true nature. The financial ruin that forced us to redefine our worth beyond material measures, the illness that became our most profound teacher of presence, the betrayal that led us back to our own unshakable center. These were never misfortunes, but mercies in disguise. They were the universe's fierce way of answering the prayers we whispered, but didn't yet understand. Make me whole, show me truth, bring me home. The spiritual attacks were the response to those prayers, not in the form we expected, but in the form we needed. Now comes the transformational invitation, to stop preparing for battle and start recognizing we are the ground upon which all battles are fought. The shadows we've been wrestling were never separate from us, but parts of our own consciousness calling for integration. This is the final revelation. There is no attacker and attacked, only different aspects of the self in conversation. The darkness was never our enemy, but our unclaimed power. the unlit corners of our potential waiting to be brought into the warmth of awareness. The call is not to transcend our humanity, but to embody our divinity within it, to stop seeking immunity from life's storms, and instead become the eye of the hurricane, that still point where all transformation begins. Every challenge we've faced has been sculpting us for this capacity, to hold paradox, to dance with uncertainty, to find the sacred in the rubble. The world does not need more spiritual bypassers who rise above their pain. It needs alchemists who can transform it, warriors of light who have learned to wield darkness as their forge. So let us take up this mantle not with solemn duty but with wild gratitude. For the attacks that became our allies, the wounds that became our wisdom, the breaking that became our making. Let us walk forward not as survivors of spiritual warfare, but as living testaments to its purpose, carrying within us the hard-won knowledge that no darkness can extinguish what we truly are. The dawn was never coming, we are the dawn. And when the next storm gathers on your horizon, as it will for all who dare to keep expanding, remember, you are not being tested, you are being remembered. Every attack is just another echo of your soul calling you home, not to safety but to sovereignty, not to comfort but to your infinite capacity. The light you've been seeking has always been the light you carry. Now is the time to let it blaze.